Staying with the Russia and Ukraine conflict, we're now joined by international relations analyst Dr. Oscar van Heerden. Dr. van Heerden, thank you so much for joining us. One of the reasons that we asked you on was because I think it was 2 nights ago we saw quite senior ANC officials celebrating at the Russian embassy and Russian consulate here with their stoli and saying, you know, Nostrovia and celebrating 30 years of friendship. I would suggest that that was slightly tone deaf, but perhaps we need to delve into the context here and the history of the ANC's friendship with Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was then.
Yeah, no, look, and you're spot on. It is about historical ties. At the moment, we all know that there is a long history between the governing party, the ANC, and their Russian counterparts. It goes far back as during the liberation struggle, Russia gave all manner of support to the ANC, a number of people in exile getting military training, academic training, medical training, and so on and so forth. And of course, in the various conflicts with the then apartheid National Defense Force, Russia also giving support to SWAPO, the ANC, and so on and so forth. So it does go a long way back.
Doctor, we still see, for instance, the Deputy President going to Russia for medical treatment, he amongst others, actually. And I mean, that was it was a long time ago that we had that kind of support from the USSR. What about now? Why are we so seemingly beholden to Putin?
Not so much beholden. I mean, remember, at the moment, South Africa is part of the BRICS formation in a partnership with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So there is that connection as well. And indeed, I think that it's not only historical. You know, there is a number of business interests from the private sector in South Africa. Not significant, but it's there nonetheless. We know ABM InBev has got big stakes in Russia. We know Naspers has got big stakes in Russia, and a number of other companies. We import wheat. 30% of our wheat comes from Russia, and so on and so forth. So there are those kinds of modern relations that we have with Russia, as we do with other European countries, of course. But I do think the confusion that we've observed coming from the South African government, mixed messages from our Department of International Relations, from the presidency, suggests that there is some ambivalence with regards to that very history that we have with the Russians.
I mean, I would have thought that despite business interests, and this could me being completely idealistic and not thinking in the correct business or capitalist mindset, that human rights and, our belonging to certain international relations, and such as the ICC and the UN, would supersede those kind of historical relationships.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that, the truth of the matter is, in the international system, and it is a challenge, it is a big problem, we have duality. We have a dual system which says that moral and legal implications apply to some and not to others. I think that war is a terrible thing. I think what Russia is doing in the Ukraine is not a good thing. However, the condemnation seems to be sort of less when we have the United States together with allied forces going into Afghanistan, going into Syria, where also women and children are dying in those conflicts and so forth. And yet we don't necessarily see that that is also unacceptable. And I think that, we've got many examples of spheres of influence where the US went all out during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and many other examples where they feel that their integrity, their sovereignty is being threatened. I think Putin and Russia feels the same when it comes to their backyard in terms of the Ukraine. And the fact that the Ukraine is wanting to have friendly talks with NATO, Russia sees it as a direct threat. And I think this war is a result of that.
Do you think then, you're 100% right. I mean, when it came to Syria and, you know, what was going on in Homs, we as media did not spend nearly as much time on it. And I wonder if we don't piggyback on the back of US sentiment in situations like this. I mean, we've been completely engaged in this Ukraine invasion. And I have to scratch my head sometimes and wonder why it's treated differently.
Well, I think that the truth is that for NATO and for large parts of Europe, they've always had to have a boogeyman. Russia plays and fits that shoe perfectly. Regardless of the good things that have happened in Russia, I would argue over the last 15 years, we know that the country post-1990 was in complete disarray. It was free for all. Oligarchs were in charge. The mafia was running the show. There was hardly any government to speak of. And yes, the truth is that Putin and his administration came with serious draconian laws, arresting people, threatening people, political assassinations, and so on. But I do think that anyone and everyone would agree that 15 years later, Russia is in a much better position. The economy is in a much better position. And as I say, this latest bout of NATO wanting to encroach onto the backyard of Russia, Russia is simply saying militarily, strategically, economically, they are not going to allow it. And unfortunately, the end result is an invasion, massive killing, people being displaced and so forth. As you know, 200 South Africans also trying to flee the country into Poland and Hungary and the likes. So it is just a complete mess that's going on there.
Last question, Doctor. I keep on saying last question, but I'm fascinated by this. You know, was it appropriate for senior ANC officials to be attending and posting on social media and asking us to actually broadcast their messages from the Russian consulate and embassy? Was that appropriate, or was that really tone deaf?
I think it was not appropriate. I think that at the moment, even though for the better part of the last 2 decades, South Africa has shown some consistency within its foreign policy, this is one of those issues where there's confusion. We are getting mixed messages, and I do think that it was tone deaf and not appropriate. Although, as you know, people do take sides in conflict situations, not that necessarily justifies it.